In this video, we'll be going over how to create a sketch in Inventor. We'll look at the basic sketching tools and we'll use these tools to create a sketch of a wrench. Here is the engineering drawing of the wrench we will be sketching. We will base our sketch off of the front view of the wrench, as this is where we can see the most of its features. First, we will create a new IPT file by clicking on the New button in the top ribbon. Select standard inches.ipt as we will be working in inches, then hit create. Once you have created your part file, make sure to name the part appropriately and save it in a folder where you can find it. The 4 steps to keep in mind when creating a sketch are visualize, draw shapes, constrain, then trim. First, visualize the shape. From the engineering drawing of the wrench, we could see that there are some circles, arcs, and rectangles that we will need to draw in order to create the wrench. From the engineering drawing, we can also see the dimensions we will be working with and the relative placement of our shapes. Next, we will draw the shapes we visualize using basic shape tools and place them in their relative positions. Next, it is important to constrain the shapes to each other to combine them. In this step, the dimension tool will be helpful if shapes need to be resized or repositioned. Finally, we will use the trim tool to edit our sketch and remove any excess lines. It is important to note that if we trim any lines that have been referenced for dimensions, we will likely need to go back in and reconstrain the sketch. To start our 2D sketch, we will go into the 3D Model tab at the top and select Start 2D Sketch in the ribbon. Next, we will select a plane. Selecting a plane is important for getting the correct view. If we are sketching the front view, we will select the XY plane. Next, you can start sketching using the shape tools, and finally constrain and trim your sketch. To go further into detail about selecting planes, there are several planes we can select from. When you begin creating your sketch, the plane will come from the generic XYZ coordinate system. You will always have access to these origin planes when sketching. Once you have created your 3D model, you can use any existing surface that you select, but please note that you cannot start sketches on curved surfaces. There is also an option to create a work plane that is not necessarily attached to any surface of your part. Let's go over creating a sketch in Inventor. We will use the sketching tools to create a sketch of this wrench. We will be creating 3 sketches, one for the head, one for the handle, and one for the slot. This is because each of those features will be extruded in different distances. We'll go over this more in detail in our video on using the extrude tool. Let's start a 2D sketch, and here we will need to select the plane to sketch on. We will select the XY plane so that it corresponds with the front view. We can then start creating a sketch. Let's start with making a circle. Here you can see we have 3 options. We can create a circle using a center point or tangents, and we can also create an ellipse. We will use center point to create the head of our wrench. We can snap to the origin and use that as our center point for our circle. Then we can specify a diameter of 1 inch, then hit enter. Next, let's draw out the opening for the head of our wrench using the line tool. We can specify the starting point of our line using coordinates. Hit the tab on your keyboard, and you can specify the X and Y coordinates. We will start at -2 inches in the X direction and at 0 for the Y direction. Once we place that point, you can see that you can now specify the size of the line and its angle. It is easier to work with the coordinates, so right-click and open the coordinate type drop-down, then select absolute coordinates. We need to right-click again, go into coordinate type, and this time select Cartesian coordinates. Now we can specify the coordinates of the endpoint of the line. Once again, hit tab, and this time we will specify 0 inches for the X direction and -0.5 inches for the Y direction. Now to draw the rest of the opening, we can use the guides that Inventor gives us. And you can see when you reach the circle, Inventor gives us a symbol letting us know that we are intersecting with the circle. Let's click, then move upwards and find the circle again. You can also see that Inventor gives the length and angle of our line. We see that we are at 90 degrees and at a length of 0.5 inches. Let's go to the left now, and we can snap to the y-axis. Here you can see a parallel line symbol letting us know that our line is parallel to the x-axis, which is great. And then we can go ahead and close off our sketch by snapping to the start point. We can now modify our sketch so that our wrench head has an opening. In a later video, we will go over using the modify tools, but for now we will use the trim tool and we can get rid of the excess lines to open up our wrench head. Now we have a completed wrench head. Let's finish the sketch by selecting Finish Sketch in the top right corner, and we will save our progress. Now let's create another sketch for the handle. Let's start a 2D sketch, and once again we will use the XY plane. We can now use the rectangle tool, and here we have various options for creating a rectangle. We will use 2-point rectangle. You can arbitrarily select a starting point for your rectangle by clicking, then drag your mouse to create the general size of your rectangle. Just like when creating lines, you can hit Tab on your keyboard and specify a length in the X and Y direction. But instead, we will click to place our rectangle as is, and we can use the dimension tool to specify its size and position. We can select the top and bottom of a rectangle and drag our mouse out to the side to specify a width of 0.35 inches. Next, we can use the dimension tool to specify the position of the end of the handle relative to the center of a wrench head, and this will be a distance of 4 inches. We can then use the dimension tool to specify the length of the handle, but instead we will use the tangent constraint to connect our handle to the head of the wrench. Once again, in a later video we will go over these sketching constraints, but for now, just go ahead and select the tangent constraint, which has a circle tangent to a line symbol, and we can click on the right edge of our rectangle. And you can see when we try to select the circle, there is nothing to snap to. This is because our circle is in a different sketch. To be able to use features in a different sketch, we can use the Project Geometry tool, then select the feature that we want to project into our sketch. And in our case, we will select the circle. We can now use the tangent constraint and select the rectangle and then the circle, and you can see that our rectangle will snap to be tangent to the circle. Next, we can use the dimension tool to ensure that the handle is centered. Let's click on the top of the rectangle, then select the origin, and we can specify a distance of half our wrench, so 0.175 inches. You can now see that the rectangle snaps into place and is completely dark blue. This indicates that our rectangle has been fully constrained. We can now draw a circle to create the rounded end of the handle. Select the circle tool, then snap to the x-axis, and instead of specifying a diameter, we can drag and snap to the rectangle. We can then use our tangent constraint to position our circle, and finally let's use the trim tool to get rid of the corners. Notice that the circle turned from a dark blue, being fully constrained, to a light green, meaning that our circle is no longer constrained and it can move around. This is because we had previously constrained our circle to the lines we just trimmed. So let's go ahead and reconstrain our circle using our dimension tool. Let's select the center of the circle, then the origin, and specify a distance. Note that Inventor accepts algebraic expressions, so here we can put in the distance of the origin to the very end of our handle, which is 4 inches, and then we could subtract the radius of our circle, so 0.35 inches, which is the diameter, divided by 2. Now we can use another modify tool, Extend. This tool allows us to extend a curve to the next intersecting curve, and we will use it to extend the handle to connect to the wrench head. Let's select the Extend tool, and then select the top and bottom of the handle, and you can see that it extends to the wrench head. We can then trim off any unnecessary lines. Now, it is important to note that our sketch needs to be closed in order to extrude it. In our case, the handle is not closed because the head of the wrench is in a different sketch, so it does not close off our handle. We can use the Arc tool to close off our handle. You can see that we have 3 different options for creating an arc, and in a later video we'll go over the Arc tool in more detail. But for now we will just use the 3-point arc, which works by specifying a starting point, an ending point, and a point to specify the radius of the arc. Let's snap to the intersection of our handle and wrench head at the top for our starting point, then to the bottom intersection point for our second point, and then we can snap to the circle to specify the radius for the third point. And here it gives us a radius of 0.5 inches, which is the radius of the wrench head. Notice that the arc is still green and unconstrained. This is because the center of the arc is not constrained. We can use the coincident constraint to snap the center of our arc to the origin. Now we can finish the sketch. Finally, we need to create the slot for our wrench handle, so let's start a new sketch. In the rectangle dropdown, you can see that there are several options for creating a slot. We will use center to center, which lets us specify the placement of the center points of the arcs and then a width for the slot. We will snap to the x-axis and we can loosely place the start and ending points. Then we can specify a width of 0.2 inches. We can then use the dimension tool to position it appropriately. But first we need to project the geometry of the other sketches so that we can use them when dimensioning. We can then specify a distance of 0.5 inches between the left center point of the slot and the center point of the circle and the handle. Then we can specify a distance of 2.25 inches between the center points. And finally, to ensure that our slot stays centered, we can specify a distance of 0.1 inches between the top of the slot to the origin. Go ahead and click Finish Sketch in the top right corner, and we now have a finished wrench. In following videos, we will go over transforming this 2D sketch into a 3D model. Let's discuss some important items for managing your sketches. Remember that you can always edit your sketches if you make a mistake. If you've already converted your sketch into a 3D feature, you can still change your sketch and it will automatically update the solid. Next, it is important to note that if you change a sketch such that a subsequent sketch is not possible, Inventor will give us an error. For example, in the case of our wrench, if we made a change to our wrench head such that the handle sketch is no longer feasible, you will get an error. So please be mindful of how you layer your sketches. Finally, a good rule of thumb is to keep it to one feature per sketch. As we just did in this example, we created a sketch each for the head, the handle, and the slot. This will be helpful later on when extruding your sketches into 3D features. Inventor allows you to rename your sketches and features to help you stay organized. This concludes our video on sketching. Thanks for watching.